March 18th, 1944. Birmingham, England. It's dark, pitch dark. The kind of dark that swallows sound and smothers hope. Rain falls in sheets, washing away chalk marks on broken cobblestones. Searchlights cut through low clouds, their beams crossing like ghostly fingers reaching for German bombers hidden above. Air raid sirens wail their familiar, terrible song. Inside the basement of a shattered municipal building, Captain Malcolm Huxley kneels beside a massive cylinder of metal and explosives. An unexploded German SC-1000 bomb, what the Brits call a Hermann, half buried in rubble. His hand hovers over its fuse mechanism. The bomb disposal squad behind him stands frozen, barely breathing. The squad leader whispers, "Are you really doing this reverse diffusal thing, Hux?" Malcolm doesn't answer. His breath fogs in, the cold air. His fingers trace the edge of the fuse pocket. He's quiet, still listening. Then through the dim light, he spots it. The secondary trigger mechanism, German, complex, lethal. It's connected to two more systems, all designed to ensure detonation no matter what. Malcolm exhales. One turn. The timer mechanism clicks audibly in the silence, and a second later, nothing happens. The other bomb squad members hesitate, confused. They weren't expecting a man to deliberately activate part of a bomb's mechanism. They weren't expecting someone to manipulate a fuse this way, and they sure as hell weren't expecting the bomb to remain intact. Inside the basement, the squad leader gasps. The senior officer whispers, "Christ alive, Huxley! What did you just do?" But Malcolm Huxley doesn't celebrate. He's already examining the next component, tracking the wiring systems. Because this isn't just luck, this is strategy. This is what happens when a watchmaker's son from Bristol rewrites the rules of bomb disposal by understanding mechanisms like living things and turning himself into a one-man savior. They laughed at him. They said it would never work until it did. And when the dust finally settled, the Germans weren't the only ones surprised. The disposal expert no one expected. Before he became the man who prevented a German bomb from decimating Birmingham's city center, Malcolm Huxley was just another quiet intellectual from Bristol. He wasn't imposing, he wasn't brash. He didn't grow up around explosives or even military hardware. He grew up fixing watches. His father ran a small clockmaking shop. His mother was a school teacher, and like so many young men after the war began, Malcolm enlisted in the Royal Engineers because he felt it was the right thing to do. He never imagined he would end up defusing bombs, let alone developing a technique that would save thousands of lives in one of England's most vital manufacturing centers. Malcolm trained at the Royal Engineers facility in Ripon, where he was assigned to the bomb disposal unit. His instructors noted he had steady hands, meticulous attention to detail, and a quiet way of thinking through problems that most recruits didn't possess. While others approached bombs with textbook procedures, Malcolm saw patterns. He recognized designs. He anticipated. Still, no one noticed him. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the loudest. And in a war, where bold actions often received attention, Malcolm stayed in the shadows until the bombing of Britain intensified. By the time he was stationed in Birmingham in late 1943, the war had shifted. The Luftwaffe had changed tactics. They weren't just bombing indiscriminately anymore. They were targeting industrial centers with precision, using delayed action bombs designed specifically to thwart disposal teams. But now came the hard part. Dealing with increasingly sophisticated German fuses, booby traps, anti-handling devices, and time delay mechanisms that killed dozens of disposal experts. That's where Malcolm's unique perspective came in. The SC-1000 Hermann was Germany's largest high-explosive bomb. Over 2,500 pounds of destructive force packed into a cylinder, capable of leveling entire city blocks. But the bomb had problems, serious ones, from the German perspective. Its size made it unwieldy for aircraft to carry. Its explosive force was often wasted in soft ground. And when fitted with delayed action fuses, nearly 30% failed to detonate as intended. Still, the bomb had advantages. It was terrifying, psychologically devastating, and when dropped on vital infrastructure, it could paralyze an entire city's operations for days. But it required precise engineering, and it required bomb disposal experts willing to die trying to defuse it. That's where Malcolm came in. After 6 months of increasingly dangerous disposals and close calls, his squad had developed a certain fatalism. His commander was Lieutenant James Weatherby, a hard-nosed veteran who didn't much care for theory. "Keep it simple," Weatherby used to say. "Find it, defuse it, survive." But Malcolm was starting to think survival wasn't going to come from standard procedures. It was going to come from understanding, from thinking like the enemy, from doing something no one else dared to do. So, one night while studying fuse diagrams after a long day's work, Malcolm brought it up. "What if," he asked, "we approached these delayed action fuses in reverse?" The senior technician, Sergeant William Morris, laughed. "You mean start from the back?" "No," Malcolm said. "I mean understand that these are mechanical systems with logical sequences. What if instead of disabling the fuse, we temporarily activate certain components to make the others accessible, like picking a lock from the inside? That way, we can manipulate the anti-handling mechanisms by working with them rather than against them." Weatherby stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "That's the dumbest bloody thing I've heard all month," he said. But Malcolm wasn't joking. He was already planning how to make it work. Rejection, trial, and a mechanism through the darkness. At first, no one took Malcolm seriously. The idea of partially activating a bomb's triggering mechanism, of treating a Hermann like a complex watch that needed adjustment rather than dismantling, was madness to most of the squad. They called it watchmaker's folly. They said he was trying to defuse bombs like he'd fix a grandfather clock, tinkering, with gears that could blow him to kingdom come. Lieutenant Weatherby, the squad commander, made it clear. "This isn't the kind of war where you get to experiment, Huxley. You see, a Type 17 fuse, you follow protocol, or you're dead faster than you can blink." But Malcolm didn't back down. He kept thinking, kept drawing diagrams, kept running scenarios in his notebook. Trigger sequences, mechanical tolerances, estimated reaction times for anti-handling mechanisms. He studied the engineering of the ZU-S-40 anti-disturbance device, especially when, coupled with the long delay Type 17 fuse the Germans had begun using extensively. These mechanisms could keep a bomb dangerous for up to 144 hours after impact, but their effectiveness relied on a predictable approach to defusal. If he was going to outsmart them, he had to understand their design philosophy perfectly, So he collected fragments, studied, recovered components, analyzed patterns in how German engineers had evolved their designs over time. He looked for tendencies, for signatures, for the invisible hand of creators who never expected their work to be so carefully scrutinized. Still, no one approved his approach until one afternoon in mid-February. The city was shrouded in late winter fog. Cold seeped through buildings like a living thing. The unit had been called to 5 separate incidents in a week. The men were exhausted, nervous, and constantly aware of their mortality. That day, a nearby disposal team had been killed while attempting to defuse a delayed action bomb near the Longbridge factory. 3 men vaporized in an instant, nothing left to bury but fragments. That night, Malcolm made his move. He asked Morris, the senior technician, to help him test a theory on a recovered but disarmed fuse mechanism. They worked through the early morning hours, examining how the clockwork timing system interfaced with the detonator. Instead of following protocol and removing components in sequence, Malcolm demonstrated how activating the timer under controlled conditions could actually disengage the anti-handling mechanism, making subsequent steps safer. Nothing explosive happened during the demonstration. Just the soft ticking of gears, the gentle click of pins falling into place. But something clicked for Morris. The approach had merit. The design made sense. They returned to quarters without telling. WWII. Malcolm didn't argue. He knew what he'd seen. He knew it could work. The next day, everything changed. A massive unexploded SC-1000 was discovered beneath the rubble of Birmingham's Central Post Office. It had penetrated 3 floors before coming to rest in the basement. Its fuse was active. Its anti-handling devices were intact. Attempts to approach it using standard protocols had detected movement in the mechanism. So WWII, half in desperation, turned to Malcolm. "You still think that watchmaker's trick of yours works?" Malcolm nodded. "Then get down there and prove it." They gave him one shot, one chance. Malcolm chose his tools carefully. Specially modified wrenches, brass non-sparking implements, feeler gauges normally used for engine work. He descended into the basement alone, the rest of the squad monitoring from a distance. The bomb lay half buried in concrete and twisted steel. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Malcolm could see it was a late model, likely containing both a Type 17 and ZUS 40 combination. He didn't wait for confirmation. He adjusted his headlamp, took a breath, and began. First, he identified the fuse pocket. Then, contrary to all protocol, he gently rotated the arming vane 2 degrees clockwise, just enough to engage the first step of the timing mechanism. A soft click echoed in the basement. The squad above held their breath. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. Then Malcolm proceeded to the next step, using the partial activation to bypass the anti-withdrawal collar that would normally detonate if disturbed. The mechanism responded exactly as he'd predicted. 23 minutes later, Malcolm extracted the main fuse assembly intact. The bomb was neutralized. The building, the street, and potentially hundreds of lives were saved. The defusal was confirmed. Reverse activation, counterintuitive approach, textbook contradiction. No one laughed anymore. That one defusal didn't just save lives, it rewrote what a bomb disposal expert could be. and for Malcolm Huxley, it was only the beginning. City center dangers and a theory put into practice. Birmingham wasn't just a target, it was a keystone in Britain's war effort, stretching across 30 square miles of factories, rail yards, and production facilities vital to the Allied campaign. It was where Britain's industrial might was concentrated. The Spitfire aircraft was manufactured at Castle Bromwich. The BSA factory produced rifles and machine guns. Tanks, ammunition, and essential components flowed from its workshops daily. And in March of 1944, Malcolm Huxley and his squad were thrown right into its defense. Orders came down: clear the unexploded ordnance around New Street Station and secure the approach to the small arms factory. It was dangerous work, little more than a deadly game of hide-and-seek with bombs buried in rubble. The Germans had targeted transportation hubs. Buildings were rigged with booby traps from previous raids. Delayed action bombs ticked away beneath collapsed structures, and somewhere out there, the largest unexploded Hermans waited like silent predators in the debris. It was hell on earth. Every site, Malcolm would later write in a letter home, felt like a death lottery. You didn't know if the next bomb would be stable or seconds from detonation. Their unit, Disposal Squad 4B, was battered but operational. Weatherby was tense, always checking reports. Morris, the technician, stopped making jokes. And Malcolm, he grew focused, almost eerily calm. He wasn't afraid. He was preparing because this time he had a theory to prove. The success of his reverse activation wasn't luck. He'd studied the mechanisms, calculated the sequences, chosen his approach with mathematical precision. Now he wanted to formalize the technique. Not just one successful diffusal, but a methodology. His idea was to find a pattern in German. Bomb engineering, a psychological profile of the designers themselves, revealed through their creations. He found it while examining 3 different recovered fuse assemblies. The Germans weren't just building bombs. They were building puzzles with predictable solutions if you understood the mindset behind them. Malcolm proposed documenting a new approach, one that treated each bomb type as a distinct personality with tendencies and weaknesses. It wasn't standard doctrine, but it wasn't fantasy either. Weatherby hesitated. "This isn't a chess match, Huxley. These are bloody bombs, not personality profiles." "I know," Malcolm replied. "But if we try to fight them with just protocols, we'll keep losing men. These designs have signatures. They have habits." After hours of tense discussion, Weatherby relented. "One chance. You're wrong. You're off the squad." They were called to a site near the jewelry quarter before dawn. The night had been quiet, almost unnaturally so. The only sound was the distant rumble of anti-aircraft guns and the occasional crash of debris shifting in damaged buildings. They parked their disposal truck behind a partially collapsed church. Malcolm organized his tools according to his new classification system, preparing for whatever they might find. And then they waited. The report came in at first light. A caretaker had discovered something protruding from the rubble of a watchmaking factory. Ironic, given Malcolm's background. Initial assessment suggested it was large, unexploded, and had a delayed action fuse that had failed to function properly. Malcolm approached the site alone. The bomb had crashed through the roof and 2 floors before embedding itself at an angle in the basement. It was indeed an SC-1000, nearly identical to the one he'd defused weeks earlier. But something was different. The fuse housing had a newer design, one he hadn't encountered before. The city was shrouded in late winter fog. Cold seeped through buildings like a living thing. The unit had been called to 5 separate incidents in a week. The men were exhausted, nervous, and constantly aware of their mortality. That day, a nearby disposal team had been killed while attempting to defuse a delayed action bomb near the Longbridge factory. 3 men vaporized in an instant, nothing left to bury but fragments. That night, Malcolm made his move. He asked Morris, the senior technician, to help him test a theory on a recovered but disarmed fuse mechanism. They worked through the early morning hours, examining how the clockwork timing system interfaced with the detonator. Instead of following protocol and removing components in sequence, Malcolm demonstrated how activating the timer under controlled conditions could actually disengage the anti-handling mechanism, making subsequent steps safer. Nothing explosive happened during the demonstration. Just the soft ticking of gears, the gentle click of pins falling into place. But something clicked for Morris. The approach had merit. The design made sense. They returned to quarters without telling. Weatherby. Malcolm didn't argue. He knew what he'd seen. He knew it could work. The next day, everything changed. A massive unexploded SC-1000 was discovered beneath the rubble of Birmingham's central post office. It had penetrated 3 floors before coming to rest in the basement. Its fuse was active. Its anti-handling devices were intact. Attempts to approach it using standard protocols had detected movement in the mechanism. So Weatherby, half in desperation, turned to Malcolm. "You still think that watchmaker's trick of yours works?" Malcolm nodded. The news spread quickly through bomb disposal units. A new German fuse had been discovered and neutralized. Malcolm's report, detailing both the technical specifications and his psychological assessment of the design, evolution, was rushed to headquarters. And somewhere in London, people who made decisions about the war effort began to take notice of a quiet man who saw bombs not as weapons, but as conversations between engineers, from theory to practice. Word of the defusal spread through disposal units faster than orders could be issued. Within days, other squads were talking about it during their brief rest periods. "Did you hear about Huxley?" one technician whispered. "Diffused a modified Type 50 by treating it like it had a personality." Most didn't believe it. Some said it was dumb luck. Others said it was exaggeration. But by the next week, Malcolm's technical drawings and approach had been distributed to every bomb disposal unit in the country. They'd found 3 more of the modified fuses, and his method had worked each time. There was no denying it now. Malcolm Huxley had done what few in the bomb disposal community had accomplished. He'd outthought the German designers by seeing beyond the mechanisms to the minds that created them. Lieutenant Weatherby, who had once called it the dumbest thing he'd ever heard, now began calling it Huxley's intuition. When headquarters requested a comprehensive explanation, Weatherby didn't mince words. "Technician Huxley's approach to fuse mechanisms is unorthodox," he wrote, "but undeniably effective. Permission requested to implement training based on his psychological profiling method." No immediate reply came. No official approval, but no one told them to stop either. So, Malcolm continued refining his approach. 3 days later, at a collapsed warehouse near the canal network, he encountered something new entirely. He set up his equipment beside a massive unexploded bomb that had been discovered during clearing operations. Initial Assessment suggested it contained an experimental fuse type. He worked methodically, first examining external markers, then gently probing accessible components. Just before noon, he identified the system, a hybrid mechanism combining electrical and mechanical elements in a way he hadn't seen before. Malcolm took a deep breath, recalled everything he'd learned about German design, philosophy, and began a careful disassembly sequence that contradicted every manual but aligned perfectly with his understanding of the engineer's intent. The bomb was neutralized in 40 minutes. The fuse was extracted intact. And for the third time in as many weeks, Malcolm's squad had defeated a device specifically designed to kill them. By now, his approach had gained credibility. Morris started referring to bombs by personality types. This one's a perfectionist, everything in sequence. Or, this is a paranoid design, triple, redundancy everywhere. Weatherby joked about giving each bomb a proper psychological evaluation before defusal. Even support teams started adopting the terminology, referring to straightforward types or complex overthinkers when describing unexploded ordnance. And behind the scenes, other squads began implementing Malcolm's methods unofficially, quietly. Because if there was one thing Birmingham's constant bombing was proving, it was that traditional approaches weren't keeping pace with German innovation. You couldn't just follow the manual when the enemy rewrote their designs weekly. You had to adapt. And that's exactly what Malcolm was doing. But adaptation came at a cost. As his methods gained acceptance, so did the danger. The WWII. Germans were no fools. They began introducing random elements into their fuses, creating deliberate misdirections, adding components that served no purpose except to confuse disposal experts. One bomb was found to contain a completely fake secondary fuse system that would trigger detonation if approached, according to standard procedures. Malcolm and his team narrowly avoided disaster when they discovered the deception just moments before it would have claimed their lives. It shook them, but it didn't stop them, because now they weren't just surviving. They were engaging in a direct battle of wits with German bomb designers. And somewhere between theory and application, amid freezing rain, collapsed buildings, and the ever-present smell of cordite, Malcolm Huxley, watchmaker's son, puzzle solver, quiet thinker, was becoming something the war had never seen before. A bomb psychologist, a legend with a name, and an approach that seemed backward to everyone but him. The perfect defusal under pressure. April 10th, 1944. It was the day the sky fell. The Luftwaffe, determined to break Birmingham's industrial capacity once and for all, launched one of the heaviest raids of the year. Over 150,000. Bombers dropped their payloads in waves, targeting the railway network, the BSA factory, and the heart of the manufacturing district. Malcolm's unit was stretched to breaking point, rushing from site to site as reports of unexploded bombs flooded in. By dawn, they'd identified 27 major unexploded ordnance locations, many in critical infrastructure. They had 18 hours at most before the delayed action fuses would begin detonating across the city. Malcolm's squad was assigned to the most critical site, an unexploded SC-1000 that had punched through the roof of the central power station. No electricity meant no factories. No factories meant no production. No production meant vulnerability at a crucial moment in the war. At first light, they approached the building cautiously. The massive generator hall was largely intact, but the administrative wing had partially collapsed. Malcolm set up his equipment near the entry point, gathering. intelligence before approaching the bomb directly. "Huxley," Weatherby said quietly, "if this one goes, half the city loses power. The factories go dark. Water pumping stations fail." "I know," Malcolm replied, checking his tools. "We're not going to let that happen." They went silent. Each man took his position. Morris checked the equipment. Specialized. Stethoscopes to listen for ticking mechanisms. Remote manipulation tools for initial assessment. Brass, non-sparking implements for the delicate work. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of damaged electrical components. Malcolm descended into the partially collapsed basement alone. The bomb had crashed through multiple floors before embedding itself at an angle beside a main power conduit. If it detonated, it would not only destroy the building, but sever power to approximately 40% of Birmingham's industrial capacity. The bomb was massive, its dark metal skin scratched but intact. As Malcolm approached, he could hear something unusual, a faint, irregular ticking. Not the steady rhythm of a standard delay fuse, but something erratic, almost random. "I'm picking up an unusual timing signature," he radioed back, "not consistent with any known Type 17 or 50 series." "New design?" Weatherby's voice crackled through the headset. "Possibly, or—" Malcolm paused, listening more carefully. "No, this is deliberate. They've introduced a random element to the timing mechanism. It's not meant to be predictable." Malcolm shone his light across the bomb's surface, noting small differences in the casing design. This wasn't just a standard Herman with modifications. This was something the disposal teams hadn't encountered before, a bomb specifically designed to defeat current disposal techniques. "I'm going to need complete silence," he said into the radio. "This one's different." He began his assessment, first examining the visible components without touching the bomb. The fuse pocket was slightly recessed, a deviation from standard design. The arming vane had an unusual locking mechanism. Everything about it suggested a deliberate attempt to counter existing disposal methods. Malcolm took a deep breath and applied his psychological approach. If this bomb was designed by engineers who knew their previous designs had been defeated, how would they think? What would they assume about the disposal expert approaching their creation? "They expect us to be cautious now," he whispered to himself. "They expect us to work slowly, methodically, so they've built in impatience." The irregular ticking suddenly made sense. It wasn't random. It was a psychological trigger designed to create anxiety, to make the disposal team rush. The longer one listened, the more unsettling it became. Malcolm radioed his findings. "It's a mind game. The irregular timing is deliberate. They want us to rush, to make mistakes." "Can you disarm it?" Weatherby asked, tension evident in his voice. "Yes, but not by any method we've used before. I need to approach this one differently." Instead of beginning with the fuse pocket, Malcolm focused on the base of the bomb, an area typically left until later in the disposal process. Using specialized tools, he carefully exposed a section of the casing, where he suspected an access panel might be hidden. There it was, a secondary entry point, disguised as part of the structural casing. It would never be found by someone following standard procedures. Malcolm worked deliberately, ignoring the increasingly erratic ticking from the main fuse. "I've located a concealed access point," he reported. "I believe this is the actual disarming location. The main fuse pocket is a deliberate distraction." 20 minutes of careful work revealed a complex mechanism unlike anything in the manuals. Malcolm studied it, noting how the components interacted. This wasn't just a bomb. It was a puzzle box designed by someone who understood both engineering and psychology. "I understand now," Malcolm said quietly. "It's not just random. It's a signature. Someone specific designed this. Someone who thinks like a chess player." He adjusted his approach, working not according to protocol, but according to what he perceived as the designer's intent. Each component was addressed in an order that seemed counterintuitive, but aligned perfectly with the psychological profile he'd constructed. The ticking suddenly stopped. The basement went silent. Weatherby's voice came through the radio, tense and urgent. "Huxley, what's happening?" "It's all right," Malcolm replied, his voice steady. "That was supposed to happen. The timing mechanism has disengaged. One more sequence, and we'll have it." 3 minutes later, Malcolm extracted a complex fuse assembly, unlike anything they'd seen before. The bomb was neutralized. The power station was saved. Birmingham's industrial heart would continue beating. When Malcolm emerged from the basement, carrying the fuse in a specialized container, Weatherby didn't speak. He simply nodded, a gesture that contained more respect than words could express. Morris examined the fuse with professional curiosity. "This isn't just new," he said. "This is art, deadly art." "Yes," Malcolm agreed, "and now we need to understand the artist." The bomb that didn't explode didn't just save a power station. It provided insight into the evolution of German engineering, the psychology of their designers, and the next phase of this invisible war fought with wits rather than bullets. And for Malcolm Huxley, it confirmed that his approach wasn't just valid, it was essential. The man behind the fuse, and the cost of brilliance. By now, Malcolm Huxley was known throughout the bomb disposal community, not just as a skilled technician, but as something else entirely. A decoder of lethal puzzles, a thinker in a field dominated by procedure. But behind every legend, there's a cost. April turned cold and wet. Rain fell relentlessly. The bombing continued, less frequent but more targeted. Morale wavered. The constant stress of facing death took its toll. Even the most experienced disposal, experts began to show signs of strain. Trembling hands, loss of appetite. The 1,000-yard stare of men who had looked at death too often. Squad 4B's truck was now dented and mud splattered, bearing the scars of hasty drives through debris-strewn streets. They never cleaned it anymore. The grime became part of it, like a testament or a warning. Malcolm changed too. He no longer flinched. The sound of air raid sirens. He barely reacted when buildings collapsed nearby. But what did affect him, what stayed with him, was the silence after each successful defusal. The knowing, the moment between disarming a bomb and the next breath, when he'd realized that hundreds of lives had been unknowingly spared. People who would never know how close they had come to obliteration. He wrote to his father, "I don't know how to process what we're doing anymore. Every bomb I defuse saves countless lives, but every bomb I encounter is designed by someone as clever as I am. Perhaps more so. Sometimes I can almost see the mind behind the mechanism, the intent behind the engineering. It's like playing chess with a ghost." Morris stopped joking entirely. Weatherby grew protective, carefully selecting which sites to send Malcolm to based on criticality rather than risk. and Malcolm began carrying with him a pocket watch his father had made. Simple, reliable, ticking with perfect precision. He kept it in his breast pocket, directly over his heart. "Something to remind me what I'm fighting for," he said. "Order, not chaos." But even with the emotional burden, he never stopped evolving his methods. During one particularly challenging defusal near the Hafsi-Gir railway junction at New Street, he encountered a bomb that combined electrical and mechanical systems in a way specifically designed to defeat sequential approaches. Rather than treating the components as separate systems, Malcolm addressed them as an integrated whole, working on multiple elements simultaneously. The bomb was neutralized in record time, not out of showmanship, but out of necessity, because every minute a bomb remained active represented lives at risk. By now, the authorities had stopped questioning his methods. In fact, they'd begun officially documenting them, creating new protocols based on his psychological profiling approach. They even assigned a special liaison to work with him, recording and distributing his insights to other units. But Malcolm didn't see himself as a teacher or innovator. He still saw himself as a problem solver, still the watchmaker's son, just trying to keep his city functioning amidst chaos. One night after their 30th successful defusal, Weatherby asked him, "What happens when this war is over?" Malcolm looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred in places from fragments and tools. "I suppose I go back to watches," he said, "simple mechanisms with no malice behind them." And for a moment, it was quiet in their makeshift quarters. No sirens, no radio chatter, just the rain against the windows and the memory of a man who changed the rules. Not to be a hero, but to keep a city's heart beating. The man who disarmed the clock. When the spring rains finally stopped over the battered skyline of Birmingham, they revealed more than broken buildings and crater-pocked streets. They revealed the ghosts of a technology battle undone, defeated not by force, but by understanding. Among those ghosts was the legacy of one young man, Malcolm Huxley. He didn't alter the war through rank or decoration. He had no unit named after him, no official technique bearing his signature, no medal pinned to his chest in public ceremony. But what he did have was something far rarer, a mind that refused to accept that German engineering was infallible, that bombs were merely weapons rather than communications. From one technical mind to another, the official reports rarely mentioned him by name. They referenced innovative disposal methodology, psychological component analysis, reverse sequence neutralization. But the men who survived the disposal squads didn't care for language like that. They just said he taught us to think like the enemy. By mid-May 1944, Malcolm's approach had spread beyond informal adoption. Training. Centers began officially instructing new disposal technicians to consider the personality of different bomb types, to look for signatures in design, to think beyond the mechanism to the intent behind it. And yet Malcolm wasn't there to see it fully implemented. After a particularly harrowing defusal, a bomb that contained a recording device that captured disposal sounds and would detonate if it detected certain tool signatures, he requested transfer to a research unit. Not because he was afraid, but because he believed he could save more lives by understanding the enemy's designs before they reached the field. They let him go. When he arrived at the classified research facility in southern England in the summer of '44, no one saluted, no one celebrated. A senior engineer handed him a German fuse recovered from a crash site. Another set a cup of tea beside him. And that, Malcolm always said, was the proper way to begin work. He never built a career from his wartime experience, never wrote a technical manual, never called himself a savior. But if you visited his watchmaking shop in Bristol in the 1970s, you might have noticed a small, disarmed fuse mechanism in a glass case on the wall, polished, inert, harmless. And if you'd asked about it, he'd smile and say, "That's the one that taught me to listen to what machines are trying to tell us." It's easy in hindsight to quantify war through statistics. Bombs dropped, buildings destroyed, lives lost. But stories like Malcolm Huxley's remind us that war is not about numbers. It's about moments, micro decisions, quiet, calculated insights made by individuals no one notices until it's too late to ignore them. Malcolm didn't win through technology. He won through a refusal to accept the obvious. He asked a question that nobody else had the courage or imagination to ask. What if these bombs aren't just weapons, but puzzles with solutions? What if understanding the Creator is as important as understanding the creation? And in that question lived the seed of everything that followed. Lives saved, minds changed, and a new way of thinking born not from a manual, but from the insight of a quiet young man with a watchmaker's patience. Maybe that's the real legacy of people like him. Not the number of bombs diffused, but the number of lives that never knew they were saved. Because one man decided to look at destruction from the inside out. But there was one bomb that truly cemented Malcolm Huxley's place in Birmingham's wartime history. A bomb that never exploded, yet changed everything. It was discovered on May 16, 1944, during clearance operations near the city's main water treatment facility. Initial reports suggested it was massive, possibly two SC-1000s fused together, an experimental design never encountered before. If detonated, it would destroy not just the facility, but rupture the main water lines serving the entire industrial district. Malcolm, now heading a specialized research unit, was recalled from London specifically for this threat. He arrived by military transport in the early hours, grim-faced and focused. The site had been evacuated for half a mile in every direction. Essential workers had been relocated to secondary facilities. The city held its breath. "What are we looking at?" he asked Weatherby, who had remained in Birmingham. "We're calling it the Conductor," Weatherby replied, handing Malcolm the preliminary assessment. "It's like nothing we've seen. Multiple fusing systems, integrated timing mechanisms, and what appears to be a fluid, mercury switch arrangement that reacts to specific movement patterns." Malcolm studied the report, then the site maps. The bomb had penetrated the main filtration building before coming to rest against a primary water main. Its position couldn't have been more perfectly calculated to maximize damage to the city's infrastructure. "This isn't random," Malcolm said. "This is targeted. They know exactly what they're hitting and why." The team approached the site cautiously. The building's roof had partially collapsed, allowing a shaft of morning light to illuminate the scene below. There it was, an elongated cylinder nearly 15 feet in length, its surface unmarked by serial numbers or standard identification. This was a prototype, a one-of-a-kind weapon. Malcolm descended alone into the damaged structure, communicating via a landline rather than radio to avoid any potential interference with electrical components. The bomb rested at a precise angle, neither fully horizontal nor vertical, its nose section partially embedded in concrete. Initial assessment confirms it's non-standard, he reported. Multiple access panels, at least 3 visible fuse pockets, and what appears to be an external power source still active. External power? Weatherby's voice came through with concern. Battery operated? Yes, which means it's monitoring something. Vibration, sound, maybe even temperature changes. I need absolute silence and stability. For the next hour, Malcolm carefully documented every visible aspect of the bomb, without touching it. He sketched components, photographed unusual features, and began constructing a mental model of its operation. What emerged wasn't just a bomb, it was a statement, a culmination of German bomb design philosophy. It contained elements from various fuse types, combined in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of British disposal techniques. It was, in effect, a direct response to Malcolm's own methods. This was designed by someone who knows what we're doing, he said quietly into the landline. Someone who has studied our disposal reports, who understands how we think. Can you disarm it? Weatherby asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Malcolm stared at the device for a long moment. Yes, he finally said. But not alone. I need Morris down here with me. This requires simultaneous work on multiple systems. Morris joined him 30 minutes later, bringing specialized equipment developed based on Malcolm's previous insights. Them two men worked in near-perfect silence, communicating through hand signals and occasional whispers. Look at the wiring configuration. Malcolm pointed to a section visible through a small inspection panel they'd carefully opened. It's deliberate redundancy, but not for reliability. It's to mislead us into thinking there are multiple independent systems when they're actually interconnected. A misdirection, Morris agreed, like a magician's trick. Exactly. They want us focused on the complexity, so we miss the underlying simplicity. Hour after hour, they methodically mapped the bomb's internal structure, identifying the true activation paths among dozens of decoys. What they discovered was both brilliant and terrifying. A system that learned from their approach that would adapt to standard disarming techniques by rerouting its triggering mechanism. By late afternoon, they had reached the critical stage. The primary power source needed to be disconnected, but doing so would potentially trigger a secondary system unless precisely counterbalanced. On my count, Malcolm instructed. 3, 2, 1. Both men made simultaneous adjustments, Malcolm disconnecting the power while Morris introduced a substitute electrical current to fool the secondary system. A tense moment passed. Nothing happened. Power system neutralized, Malcolm reported, moving to mechanical components. The disarming process continued well into the night. Each step revealed new layers of ingenuity in the bomb's design. It wasn't just deadly. It was educational, almost like a challenge left by one expert for another to solve. At 2:17 a.m., after nearly 18 hours of continuous work, Malcolm extracted the final detonator assembly. The bomb was rendered completely inert. Birmingham's water system, and by extension, its ability to function as an industrial center, was saved. But the true significance emerged only after. The bomb was carefully removed for study. Inside, they discovered not just explosives, but detailed documentation, schematics, testing data, and performance calculations. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a technology demonstrator, a prototype meant to showcase new capabilities. More shocking still was a small metal plate attached to the timing mechanism. Engraved on it in precise German script was a name, Keller, and below it, words that chilled everyone who read them. For the watchmaker's son. The bomb hadn't just targeted Birmingham's infrastructure, it had targeted Malcolm. Specifically, created by a German engineer who had been tracking his disposal techniques and developing countermeasures. "They know who you are," Weatherby said when he saw the plate. Malcolm nodded, unsurprised. "Of course they do. This has always been a conversation between engineers. Now we know who's on the other side." The intelligence value of the captured bomb proved immeasurable. Its advanced design revealed German intentions and capabilities months ahead of when they would have otherwise been discovered. Defense systems were adapted, disposal techniques evolved. Further, and somewhere in Berlin, an engineer named Keller undoubtedly received news that his masterpiece had failed to detonate, not because of malfunction, but because his intellectual adversary had risen to the challenge. The bomb that never exploded didn't just save Birmingham. It provided a crucial glimpse into the future of warfare, where the battleground wasn't just physical space, but the realm of technical innovation and psychological understanding. For Malcolm, it represented both vindication and warning. His approach had proven essential, but it had also made him a target in a very personal duel. The authorities responded by accelerating the implementation of his methods across all disposal units, creating what would eventually become known as the psychological profiling approach to bomb disposal, a methodology that would save countless lives not just during the war, but for decades afterward as unexploded ordnance continued to be discovered throughout Europe. Malcolm himself was quietly transferred to a highly classified research unit focused on anticipating and countering new German designs. His direct involvement in field disposal operations ended, but his influence expanded exponentially. In the decades after the war, long after the rubble had been cleared and Birmingham had rebuilt itself, people would occasionally ask about the water treatment plant and the bomb that never detonated. Most citizens never knew how close their city had come to paralysis, how one unexploded device had represented not just immediate danger, but a turning point in a hidden technical war. But Malcolm knew, and in his quiet moments, working on intricate watches in his Bristol shop, he would sometimes think about Keller, the German engineer whose mind he had come to understand through his creations. Wondered if Keller had survived the war, if he too had returned to civilian life, perhaps designing precision instruments rather than weapons of destruction. We would have had interesting conversations. "Keller and I," he once told a curious apprentice who had noticed the disarmed fuse on display, "we spoke the same language, just from opposite sides." That language, the dialect of precision, engineering, of cause and effect, of action and reaction, had transcended the hatred and chaos of war. It had formed a strange, unspoken bond between adversaries who never met yet came to know each other intimately through the puzzles they created and solved. The bomb that never exploded and saved Birmingham wasn't just a weapon that failed its mission. It was a message in a lethal bottle, a challenge from one mind to another. And in the response to that challenge lay the salvation not just of a city, but of a principle, that understanding will always triumph over destruction, that insight is more powerful than force. When Malcolm Huxley died in 1982, his obituary in the local paper mentioned his watchmaking business, his contributions to horology, his reputation for precision work. Only a small paragraph noted his wartime service with the Royal Engineers. But at his funeral, Among the mourners were several elderly men who stood with perfect military posture despite their years. They placed on his casket a small metal plate, polished to a mirror shine. Those close enough could see it bore a simple inscription: "To the man who listened to bombs and heard the mines behind them, Birmingham remembers." In the technical history of warfare, in the EOS, classified archives of bomb disposal methodology, in the training manuals used by EOD technicians around the world, the name Malcolm Huxley appears repeatedly, credited with fundamentally changing how we approach the neutralization of explosive devices. But perhaps his greatest legacy lives in the countless lives never disrupted, the potential tragedies that never unfolded, the city that continued to function and produce and contribute to victory, all because one quiet man understood that defusing a bomb required more than technical skill. It required empathy for its creator.